कैसे दिया कोचिंग कैसे दिया
जो अंदर होते हैं
Good morning. मैम लेट आ गई ऐसे नहीं थोड़ा पढ़ ले कौन हाँ एक दूसरे को 4 क्वेश्चन ही पूछ लेते हैं वही हमारा एब्सेंट चले गए सब लोग नाम लग दुबाई वो आप सब गए हाँ ग्रुप ही जा रहे हो वेरी गुड स्मार्ट प्रैक्टिस 10th स्टैंडर्ड में कोई छुट्टी नहीं पढ़ो अच्छी तरह से 11th में फिर से घूम लेना बॉयज पूरा में आने का इरादा है कि छुट्टी लेने का इरादा है आना है चलो I think we started with respiration or did we complete with respiration started what did we do respiration only differentiate between aerobic and anaerobic. So what did we learn? What is the definition of respiration? Do you remain absent, no, the last class? You? Okay. The girl with you, I think she also remained absent. Yes. Okay. What was the concept of respiration? Again, if I revise a little bit, we had talked about respiration. Today we are going to come with this concept of respiration. What is respiration? How did we define respiration? The biochemical process in which food is broken down. So what is the relation of respiration and nutrition?
Ma'am, the food that and the nutrients that are obtained
They're
by
not
they're not absorbed, but by the process of nutrition, specifically the glucose, it is broken down by the oxygen that we get
in the body cells.
In the body cells.
So if I ask you that, are these concepts of nutrition and respiration in our body related? Yes. By the process of nutrition, the food gets digested. Now that the food is digested into the simplest form, that is glucose, for example, I consider. Glucose, what will happen by the process of assimilation? The body cells get the glucose. Inside the body cells only now the glucose can further break down. Now this glucose and amino acids and the fatty acids, can they break down further in the intestine? No, in the intestine further breakdown is not possible. Further breakdown is possible now inside the cells. So after assimilation, what did we understand? Every single body cell would get the glucose. And especially the liver cells will be deposited with fatty acids and amino acids. Glucose in all body cells. Glucose is deposited in all body cells. Now, if you are talking about that the glucose is absorbed by the body cells, then what is the fate of the glucose in those body cells? If the body cell has a large amount of oxygen, for example in the developed plants and animals, then that glucose molecule will be further broken down to carbon dioxide, water, 38 molecules of ATP, a process known as aerobic respiration. A process known as aerobic respiration. So what are the primary requisites? You get these questions. What are the primary requisites for a cell to exhibit aerobic respiration? The cell should have
sufficient oxygen,
glucose and sufficient oxygen. So sufficient oxygen is a must, mitochondria is a must. So that organism should be having developed respiratory structures to take in the oxygen and hence aerobic respiration. But if the cell does not have adequate amount of oxygen, then what would be the fate of that glucose? Breaking it down to absence of glucose will also break down glucose. Absence of oxygen will also break down glucose. Then what is the product formed?
when there is less oxygen,
No, absence of oxygen.
absence of oxygen, ethanol.
Ethanol, also known as ethyl alcohol. Also known as ethyl alcohol, and then 2 molecules of water, 2 molecules of ATP. What is that process known as? Anaerobic respiration, taking place in simple organisms like the yeast and the bacteria. What is this process? Also known as alcoholic fermentation. This concept of alcoholic fermentation we have discussed a little bit has got a great economic importance when we talk about industries. Industries making food, different type of food items, industries making beverages. This is the concept where if I talk about any type of food processing industries, wine making industries or rum and vodka making industries, what they would do, they would try culturing bacteria in the rice or the cane juice or etc. The grapes and etc. And then in that process, there's millions of bacteria they are producing the alcohol. And then there is filtered and processed, and that is what we are talking about as the final product. I talk about the bread and the pastry and the wine making industries. They are also constantly utilizing the yeast and the bacteria, good bacteria, in the process of making all these food items. So alcoholic fermentation is of great economic importance when we talk about industries, especially food processing industries. Then, can developed organisms like human ever show anaerobic pathway? Temporarily. So then what happens temporarily when in certain cells of the body when the oxygen is deficient at times, not always, at times. When oxygen is deficient, when will the deficiency occur?
Vigorous movement of
No,
muscles.
when would the deficiency occur? Vigorous muscular activity. Vigorous muscular activity. So we are developed organisms. We have got developed respiratory structures. We can take in so much of oxygen from the environment at one go, at one breath. Then how is it possible that our cells suffer from deficiency of oxygen? Only when the contraction rate is much more than the rate of breathing. When the contraction rate and the rate of breathing is at par, same pace, same speed, then not a problem at all. But when will the process of muscle pain, exhaustion, fatigue and cramps would happen? When oxygen is becoming progressively lesser in the cells and the rate of contraction is speeding up. The rate of contraction is so much. You are running, you are into some specific fast muscular activity. So at that time, the muscles are contracting, relaxing, but that much of oxygen is not available to the cells because the breathing rate is trying to catch up and all of us we have experienced that when such type of a muscular activity we are into, the breathing rate is the first thing that increases. The breathing rate increases. Why does the breathing rate increase? To supply more oxygen to the muscle cells. To supply more oxygen to the muscle cells. So now at that time, when there's a temporary deficiency of oxygen being built up in the muscle cells, can the glucose get broken down to carbon dioxide, water, ATP, and lot of 38 ATP? No, that cannot happen. So at that time, what's happening? The glucose is partially broken down to lactic acid. And this lactic acid, as it starts accumulating in the muscle, this gives us muscle pain. So you are writing an exam, only 15 minutes left, and you are still left with 3 questions. What's happening? You are writing very fast. You are writing very fast, and after some time you get to see that muscles are aching. You are not able to write that fast. What's happening? Lactic acid building up in your muscles. Why? Contraction faster than the breathing rate, much faster than the breathing rate. So at that time, do we need any medical help? No. We take rest for 2-3 minutes, and then things are okay. Why? What has happened in those 2-3 minutes? Muscle contraction rate has slowed down and the breathing rate is more or less at par. So that is allowing the process of aerobic respiration again happen and so much of energy released from one molecule of glucose. So you get questions in different form, only the concept has to be very clear. Any type of a question you should be able to answer. That human cells, though we are absolutely aerobic, possible that our cells sometimes show anaerobic respiration, yes, when our muscle cells starts accumulating lactic acid. But now, as I said, what would happen? What would happen to an athlete when this athlete was trying to touch the finishing line but he collapsed? What must have happened to him? Lactic acid accumulation too much because the muscle contraction was so fast. And now in 5 minutes time he gets up and he can run again. What has happened in this 5 minutes time? The lactic acid has again started getting broken down to carbon dioxide, water and 38 ATP because in those 5 minutes time adequate oxygen was supplied to the muscle cells. So can lactic acid be again broken down to carbon dioxide, water, 38 ATP? Yes. So that is a temporary process which can happen in our body cells. If the lactic acid accumulation is little, we suffer from pain. If the lactic acid accumulation is quite a lot, we suffer from cramps. What is our condition? Cramps means what? The muscle is contracted but cannot relax back. Quite a number of times. That means some first aid steps also. The muscle contraction is so vigorous in certain, especially sports persons. What happens? The muscle contraction is so fast that it has become contracted but relaxed nahi ho pa raha. So at that time some spray and medicine and massages actually are required so that the muscle is made as the muscles are made relaxed so that the oxygen supply is better. So this is what we had studied the other day, the concept of aerobic, anaerobic respiration. Okay. Now next we are going to study that what are the parts of the respiratory system in human and how does the process of respiration happen. So let us start with the next part of the chapter. Look into your textbook also. There is a diagram for the respiratory system. First of all, take your notebook, write down one question. Take out your notebook, write down one question. This is the first lecture. Why all of you are signing on the book? Per lecture you are supposed to sign. When standard बच्चों का कोई भरोसा नहीं है. You sign and then you run away. Individual period. This period only for the first period. Second period में आएगा sheet फिर से only for the second period. Third period में आएगा only for the third lecture to sign. Now, the first thing is write on one question. You better write this question if there is adequate enough space. More than half space उसमें नहीं होगा. So you write in a fresh page. You write in a fresh page better. The rest of the page you can use for other question answers. Draw a neat, well-labeled diagram. What about the digestive system diagram? All of you did you do? I asked you to draw. Did I ask you to draw the digestive system diagram?
No,
Then take both the diagrams together. This you can complete as homework in this complete time. The first question you write: draw a neat, well-labeled diagram. Draw a neat, well-labeled diagram of the digestive system in human. Of the digestive system in human. Today, the last 10 minutes, we are going to play one game. So, अच्छे तरह से सुनोगे. You will try to answer. You will try to interact. जो भी समझ में नहीं आया, you have to ask me. Okay? चलो, ये हो गया number 1. Write on the next page. Next page. Draw a neat, well-labeled diagram of. Draw a neat, well-labeled diagram of the respiratory system. Draw a neat, well-labeled diagram of the respiratory system in human. Draw a neat, well-labeled diagram of the respiratory system in human. Draw a neat, well-labeled diagram of the respiratory system in human. So these two diagrams you will draw. These diagrams for drawing you get in your exam. So there are some 8-9 diagrams in your syllabus that you have to practice drawing. So these are the two simple diagrams. The difficult ones, the heart and the newborn, I will draw in the class. The nephrons and all. These are new diagrams. These are the bit difficult diagrams. So those I will take in the class. But these two are simple. You can draw from the textbook also. So the respiratory system and the alimentary canal, that is the digestive system. Only with pencil to draw. No outline or no label with pen. Okay. Diagram drawing for 2 marks when it comes in the paper. Try to pick up those 2 marks. So 2 marks easily you will get, provided your diagram is clear, bit related to what is there in real. How big should I draw the diagram? The diagram, if I talk about the ruled book here, if I have to draw the alimentary canal, the digestive system diagram should be minimum 15 to 16 lines. इससे छोटा होना ही नहीं चाहिए. So that should be an estimate. कि diagram कितना छोटा कितना बड़ा draw करना है. If I talk about the stomata can be drawn in 5-7 lines. Enough. But now I'm talking about the alimentary canal, the digestive system. So for the digestive system, minimum 15 to 20 lines में वो diagram draw करना है. You should not draw it full big page. Entire page may be drawn and should not be that so small. So your diagram on an average, if I talk about the alimentary canal diagram should come till here. Enough. And then you will always draw the diagram towards the margin, little bit towards the margin, giving enough space on the right hand side so that maximum labels you should always try putting at one side of the diagram. Cut, cross to label, not to be done. You should not cut the diagram and try labeling liver here. Cut, try the stomach here, no. Stomach and the liver and the esophagus and the large intestine, the small intestine, all is there से आना चाहिए. So these are just some few rules when you draw the diagram. So 2 marks, 3 marks जो भी diagram में रहता है, easily you can get those marks. Diagram में marks lose नहीं होना चाहिए. Okay, so now we start with respiratory system in human. What are the parts? What are their functions? Respiratory system. Respiratory system in human. What are the parts of the respiratory system? Let us try understanding. You had studied about the respiratory system in human earlier? In any standard? 8 में था. What are the parts? Can you tell me? Nostrils हाँ. फिर? Nostrils के बाद? Nostrils के बाद अच्छा. Windpipe और nostrils के बीच और भी parts हैं. हाँ, windpipe and the trachea is the same. And
Then alveoli.
Alveolus, okay, alveolus, alveoli. Did you come across the word diaphragm? Yes.
Yes.
So now just one or two parts you know, but now we'll have to learn all the parts in a sequence. Let us try understanding the parts of the respiratory system. The parts of the respiratory system in a sequence would include all can see. The respiratory system, this is the respiratory system in human. What are the parts? One after the other. I start with the nostrils, not mentioned here in the figure. Nostrils. The first part is the nostrils. What is the job of the nostrils? Just the intake of the air. Intake of the air. Now we are going to talk about respiration in detail as per your syllabus, and the entire concept of respiration in 4 different stages. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the first stage. We are talking about respiratory system. So what are the stages that we are going to study for respiration? What is this? I'm talking about what are the stages or phases of respiration. Phases. Respiration के phases क्या है? The phases of respiration. If we have to write, what would that be? The phases of respiration would be, the first we are going to talk about is breathing. Breathing. Second, we are going to learn what is gaseous exchange. Third, we are going to learn what is tissue respiration. बहुत simple है. You just need to pay a little bit of attention to understand tissue respiration. 4 is cellular respiration. So these are the 4 parts that we are going to study. These are the 4 stages of respiration that we are going to study today, one after the other. Respiratory system. What are the parts of the respiratory system in human? The parts. The first is nostrils. Second is the nasal passage. We are going to learn one special feature, function as per what is there in the portion. Nasal passage. After the nasal passage, we have got the pharynx, and that we have got the larynx. This is followed by the main part of the respiratory system for the intake of the air, the trachea, followed by the bronchi, then the bronchioles, and this is followed by the lungs. Bronchioles and the alveolus. So we are going to cover.
So we could not see the 4th one and look at her notebook, and she did not write because she could not see the cellular respiration.
Acha, ye wala, because I was
Yeah, you were right.
Okay, not a problem. Right. So now that we are talking about the parts of the respiratory system, what are the parts of the respiratory system? First, we will see in the figure the nostrils. What is the job of the nostrils? Very simple, intake of air. Nasal passage, also known as the nasal cavity. This particular region, the nasal cavity. What is the job of the nasal cavity? To warm the air. Whatever we breathe in, warm the air. What is the necessity for warming the air? Set with the body temperature. Now that we are in an AC room, what is the temperature? Perhaps 24 degrees Celsius. What is our body temperature? 37 degrees Celsius. So roughly around 8-9 degree ka difference hai. So every time when we are taking in air, if the air is cooler than our body temperature, then this nasal cavity will always warm the air, so that immediately the cool air does not enter our body and start resulting in inflammation, mucus formation, etc. So nasal cavity's job is to warm the inhaled air, to moisten the inhaled air. Then we talk about this part, the pharynx. See there. Now, if this pink region that you come across, the pharynx, through this region the food also passes and goes to the food pipe. Through this region the air also passes and goes to the windpipe. Where is the windpipe? This is the windpipe. Food pipe kahan pe hai? Just at the back. The food pipe is just at the back of the windpipe. So whenever we are eating anything, this also is passing through the pharynx and going to the food pipe. And whenever we are inhaling, that air also is going through the pharynx and entering into the windpipe. So this, what function? That's why we write. What is the function for the pharynx we write? The function for pharynx, that's why we always write common passage for food and air. Yes, it's a broad common passage, almost at the level of the ears, almost at the level of the ears. And this broad common passage is meant for the passage of the food also, and then into the food pipe, and passage of the air also, and then into the windpipe. Now, next to the pharynx is a cartilaginous box. What is this cartilaginous box here? Yes, when you touch this part of your throat, you can feel it. There's a hard cartilaginous box here. And what is this cartilaginous box meant for? Production of the voice. So it's also known as the voice box. So ये जो cartilaginous box है, इसके अंदर there are hundreds of fine thread-like structures. Whenever we are allowing the air pass through, the fine thread-like structures are all vibrating and the production of the voice. Based on how much of the air we take in, large amount, small amount, the modulation. Now that when I'm talking slow, I'm taking small amount of air. And when I have to scream and yell and shout, I have to take in a large amount of air. So modulation of the voice is absolutely based on the vibration of the thread-like structures in the larynx, based on the intake of the air, how much of the air I take in. The larynx is followed by this long tube-like structure made up of smooth muscles, and this is what is known as the windpipe, also known as the trachea. The trachea or the windpipe has got some special structures. If you look into the trachea and the windpipe, the trachea and the windpipe has got some special structure. See here, the entire trachea and also the bronchi. What is the next part after the trachea? Bronchi. The entire trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, this entire set of tubes are made up of smooth muscles. So when I say smooth muscles, are they voluntary or involuntary? Involuntary. So whenever we take in air, they would all widen. Whenever we give out air, they are supposed to squeeze, no? But they don't. These are smooth muscles, so whenever we are giving out air, exhaling, they are supposed to squeeze down. Now, if they squeeze down, the next inhalation has to be of greater strength. But now for the last 10 minutes, did you realize how many number of times did you take in air or give out air, or how many number of times you have been breathing? No, we don't, because the process of inhalation is so smooth. Why? Because the entire set of tubes, the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles partially, the trachea, the bronchi, they all have some rings of cartilage on their outer wall. Can you see this? The rings of cartilage on their outer wall. So what are these rings of cartilage doing? Not allowing the tubes to collapse. Whenever you are breathing forcibly also, then also the trachea does not collapse. The bronchi does not collapse. So the actual concept should be that when we take in air, if the tubes are a little bit broadening, then when we are giving out air, the tubes should collapse. But they don't. Why they don't? So that the next breath need not be forceful. We don't have to spend any extra energy for taking in air. So what is one special feature? We'll have to write this answer. You get this in your paper also later. What is the significance of these cartilaginous rings? Not allowing the trachea to collapse, even when we are forcibly breathing. So the trachea will divide into a number of these bronchi. And see, they first divide into two, the right and the left and the right, the left and the right side. So this is what I'm talking about, the bronchi. And then they will again keep on dividing. So from one tube, again so many. From one tube, again so many. And every single tube will terminate into some sac-like structure. So something like this. When we are talking about the trachea will always, the trachea is a comparatively broad tube. And this trachea, what did I say just now? They have got some C-shaped cartilaginous rings all over. And this will bifurcate into two narrow tubes like this. And these two narrow tubes, what are these known as? This is known as the trachea or the windpipe. And this tube that we come across, this will again bifurcate. This will again bifurcate like this. This will again keep on bifurcating. If I talk about one of these, this will again bifurcate. So they are constantly dividing this way. They are constantly dividing. I again start with this. What about this one? They will also constantly bifurcate. So what is happening? I talk about one set of tubes only. The trachea is bifurcating to form the first tube-like structures on the right and the left chest cavity. So what are we going to term this as? This is known as the primary bronchus or the bronchi, plural. This single tube primary bronchi will again divide into another set of tubes. So what are these set of tubes known as? Secondary bronchi. To make you understand that this set of tubes are not just one single line. From one tube, another 50 coming out. From another tube, another 40 coming out. From one more, another 60 coming out. It's constantly dividing. So the primary, the secondary, and then this should be the tertiary set of tubes. These are the tertiary set of tubes. So this bronchi keep on dividing like this, first, second, third level. And then the last set of tubes that we talk about, which are formed after the tertiary bronchi, these are known as bronchioles. Every single bronchiole will now terminate into a small sac-like structure like this, into a small sac-like structure like this, into a small sac-like structure like this. So this entire structure that will be formed later, this entire structure that is formed later, what is this entire structure known as? This is what is known as the lungs. So we have got a pair of such type of structures. And at the base, what? At the base of the lungs, dividing the chest cavity from the abdomen, what do we have? There's a muscular sheet. And what is this muscular sheet known as? This muscular sheet is known as the diaphragm. This muscular sheet is known as the diaphragm. So this is the diaphragm. A pair of lungs we have, where? In the chest cavity, the right and the left chest cavity. What is the meaning of the word chest cavity? The space inside the chest surrounded by the ribs that we have. And then on the outer wall, if I talk about this entire lungs, they are protected by some bony casing. What is that bony casing? The ribs, the rib cage, which are long bones starting from the backbone, the vertebral column, and coming and meeting like this, resulting in the formation of a cage, one after the other. So this pair of structures, what are some special features? The lungs are spongy. Why are the lungs spongy? Because they are made up of such type of air sacs. What are these air sacs known as? These air sacs are known as alveolus. We have learned the features. So let us start understanding the functions, special characteristics. If at all for all these. The first that we talk about nostrils. Nostrils, one special feature is the nostrils, the inner lining. The inner lining has ciliated epithelium. The inner lining has ciliated epithelium. Do you remember about this concept of ciliated epithelium? We had studied last year. Ciliated epithelium, yaad hai? The inner lining of the nostrils, the inner lining of the nasal cavity, the nostrils have got ciliated epithelium, because of which they are constantly filtering the air that we breathe in. Now filtering what? Filtering the dust particles, the microbes, no? All the unwanted soot particles, dust particles, and that's the reason the inner part of our respiratory system, even after so many years, it's all clean. Because all the unwanted substances of the air, inhaled air, gets trapped there. So we can understand that this ciliated epithelium, it acts as a filter. The ciliated epithelium in the nostrils acts as a filter. Give reason. What am I supposed to write? It constantly keeps on trapping the unwanted dust particles, microbes, etc., and does not allow them move into the inner part of the respiratory system. So that's the reason the inner regions of a respiratory system remain all free. Then next is, what is the function of the nostrils? Only one function, intake of air. That is its only one function to write. Nasal passage. What is the function of the nasal passage? Warms the inhaled air. Warms the inhaled air. Warms the inhaled air, also moistens. This also has to be, this also we can write. It moistens, makes the air moist, the dry air moist. Moistens the inhaled air. Larynx or pharynx, first of all we talk about the pharynx. It's a common passage for food and air. It's a common passage for food and air. Common passage for food and air. Larynx. We talk about the larynx. What is special about the larynx? Do you remember? The larynx is also known as the voice box. The larynx also known as the voice box. What is its function? Production of voice. Function is production of voice. But also, apart from the production of voice, also we have to write what is its other function. Respiratory job is what? Passage of the air. Passage of air. That is its job, of course, to write. The function is passage of air. Next, we talk about the trachea. Special feature is what of the trachea? Has C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Has C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Has C-shaped cartilaginous rings. That's its special feature. Bronchi, if I have to talk about the bronchi, they are a network of tubes formed by the division of the trachea. What are these? How do we define the bronchi? These are the network of tubes. These are network of tubes formed by the division of the trachea. Formed by the division of the trachea. Okay, bronchioles, the finest tubules, the finest tubes that terminate, finest tubes that terminate into an air sac. Now, finest tube, when I say, what is the diameter? The diameter of the bronchiole is nothing more than 1 millimeter. The diameter of the bronchiole is nothing more than 1 millimeter. At times they are lesser than that. Then, when we are talking about the function of all these, what is the function? What is the common function for all these? I start talking about the trachea, the bronchi, and the bronchioles. What is the common function for all these? Common function for all these is passage of air. Passage of air to the lungs from the lungs. That is the common function always we should write. The common function for the trachea, what is it doing? Carrying the air to the lungs, getting the air out from the lungs. The bronchi also doing the same job. The bronchioles also doing the same job. Okay. Now we talk about the alveolus. The alveolus. What are some special features of the alveolus? I talk about this particular structure is known as the alveolus. I talk about this specialized structures, and these specialized structures, I suppose, I understand that this is one of the bronchiole and then the air sac. The bronchiole and then the air sac. What are some special features of the alveolus? Some special features of the alveolus, they have got a thin wall. Alveolus, thin wall, made up of a single layer of epithelial cells, made up of a single layer of epithelial cells, and number 2, rich supply of blood vessels. Learn these words now. Also known as richly vascularized. What is the meaning of richly vascularized? Rich supply of blood vessels. Okay. So this is about the system to understand first. The nostrils, what is its job? Nasal cavity, what is its job? Pharynx, larynx, how they are different. Pharynx is just made up of smooth muscles. Larynx is cartilaginous. Function more or less the same. Pharynx is also helping in the passage of air. Larynx also. Trachea, bronchi, bronchioles. Structurally difference क्या है? Trachea is broad. Bronchi, bronchioles. Progressively they are becoming narrow. Thinner. Narrow they are becoming. The narrowest, the finest tubule of the respiratory system. What is it? Name the finest tubule in the respiratory system. Bronchiole. The finest tubule. What are the finest tubules that terminate into the air sac? The finest tubules are the bronchioles, and they are very, very narrow, very thin, delicate, made up of smooth muscles. Thin, delicate, finest they are, and diameter nothing more than 1 millimeter, much lesser also at times. And they will all terminate into a air sac. Now, that is what the structure would be. Since the lungs made up of millions of air sacs, see here, the entire structure is spongy, that's why. Unlike the intestine, liver, pancreas, which is solid in structure, they are all solid. This is almost like the loofah we use for scrubbing our body, soft. Air-filled, no, it is air-filled. So the entire structure, lungs, is air-filled, made up of millions of air sacs. What are these air sacs known as? Alveolus. So what should be the definition of alveolus or alveoli? You have studied, no? 9th standard mein. Neuron, what is the definition? Myofibril, what is the definition? So similarly, what should we write? The definition of alveoli also as, or alveolus also as, structural and functional unit of the respiratory system, or structural and functional unit of the lungs. So write in one question there. Once you are done with it, okay, I'll give you 1 minute. Complete this points you write. After that, we'll write on the definition of the lungs. I'm sorry, definition of the alveolus. Define alveolus. Alveolus, alveoli. Definition of the alveoli should be always structural and functional unit of the lungs. Structural and functional unit of the lungs. Structural and functional unit of the lungs. आ रहा है समझ में? Yes. When you study, also see that you know the word, understand the meaning. Anything? Okay, now this is about the respiratory system. Let us little bit talk about the diaphragm. What is diaphragm? What is the location of the diaphragm? At the base of the lungs, separating the chest cavity from the abdomen. So where is the diaphragm? Exactly here. The diaphragm is separate. It's a big muscular sheet at the base of the lungs, and that separates the chest cavity from the abdomen. And it plays a major role whenever we are talking about breathing. Plays a major role when we talk about breathing. So this is how exactly the diaphragm is. And the diaphragm normally is little bit curved, and as per breathing, it will become extremely curved or extremely flat. So we will learn that later. Next, we have to talk about the alveolus. So the entire lungs would look like this. Network of tubes, and the finest tubes terminating into a air sac. Ultimately resulting in, and this particular structure has always been compared with the bunch of grapes. How exactly the bunch of grapes look like? The structure of the lungs also, it seems, looks like that exactly. Where the small stalk of the grapes is compared as the, what it should be? The stalk of the grapes should be considered as bronchiole. So here the grape hai, those are the stalk of the grape should be what? The bronchiole. The bronchioles always dominate into the air sac. Now we'll have to learn if this is the entire alveolus, the next part we are going to understand what is the function of the lungs. You also know what is the function of the lungs. Function क्या है? मतलब gases exchange किसके साथ exchange हो रहा है? किसके साथ exchange हो किसके साथ रहा है? नहीं, lungs का जो breakdown of glucose नहीं है. Blood and alveolus. So now the next part that you have to know, what is the job of these lungs that we are going to study? The job of these lungs and the alveolus that we had studied. The job of these lungs is to purify the blood whatever comes near it. The blood which is coming near the lungs will always purify the blood. Kaise? It will take in the carbon dioxide and give the oxygen. So that means we have to definitely understand, or it is for sure, the lungs have to be, or the alveolus, these millions of alveolus have to be surrounded by large number of blood vessels. So that is what we have written. What are the special features of the alveolus? Number one, these are air sacs, like balloon-shaped structure. These are air sacs. The membrane, the wall of the air sacs are very, very thin. The walls are extremely thin. Since they are thin, they can carry out the process of exchange of the gases. Diffusion possible. If the wall would have been multi-layered thick, then diffusion would not have been possible. So the wall is extremely thin, so diffusion is possible. And exchange hoga kiske beech? Exchange will happen always with the blood. So definitely surrounding the lungs and surrounding the alveolus, there are a large number of blood vessels. So next we are going to understand that near this lungs, from where does the blood come? Or which are those prominent blood vessels which supply blood near the lungs, impure blood near the lungs? And which are those vessels which carry the pure blood from the lungs back to the heart? So here we'll try to understand one relation. And what is that relation? The blood supply to the lungs. So how is the blood supply carried out? What are some terms to understand here? The major function of the lungs that we are going to learn: purifying the blood, exchange of the gases. So here I will start talking about the heart. As of now, only these two terms you have to study. In the next segment, you will study indicate. The heart gives away one blood vessel. The heart gives away one blood vessel, meaning one blood vessel arises from the heart. What is the name of this blood vessel? This is known as the pulmonary artery. What type of blood does the pulmonary artery carry? The blood that the pulmonary artery carries is deoxygenated. And then this deoxygenated blood, what will happen to this deoxygenated blood? The deoxygenated blood, when it moves towards the lungs will carry out the process of exchange of gases or purification and result in making the deoxygenated blood oxygenated. So now from the lungs, the vessel that comes out is known as pulmonary vein. What type of blood does the pulmonary vein carry? Oxygenated blood. So the blood is oxygenated. Where will this pure blood go now? The pure blood will again go to the heart. As of now, this relation you will have to know. That now that I talk about how does we are saying that the lungs bring about the exchange of gases. Lungs help in purification of the blood. That means surrounding the lungs there should be large amount of blood supply. Which is that word I had used. You'll also have to remember to use those words in your answer. A characteristic feature that the lungs is richly supplied with blood. What will be right? Richly vascularized. Richly vascularized. What is the meaning? Rich supply of blood vessels surrounding. In the previous segment of the chapter, you have studied one specific structure with the same feature. What was that? What was that? Villi. The villus. Same feature. The villus or the villi also same feature. Thin wall made up of one single layer of epithelial cells and rich supply of blood vessels. So if I talk about any region of our body which has got those features, that means those regions of the body are specialized for the diffusion of gases. So there also we have talked about diffusion of molecules. Now we are talking about diffusion of gases. So which is the blood vessel which gives blood to the lungs? Pulmonary artery. Which is the vessel which carry blood away from the lungs? Pulmonary vein. What type of blood does the pulmonary artery carry? Deoxygenated blood. What type of blood does the pulmonary vein carry? Oxygenated blood. So I would say deoxygenated blood means blood which has got a higher proportion of carbon dioxide, and oxygenated blood means blood which has got a higher proportion of oxygen. But when I say higher proportion of oxygen and carbon dioxide, we are never to understand the proportion is never 98 is to 2 or something like that. Carbon dioxide 98% into 2. ऐसा कभी हो सकता है relation in our body? No, we will collapse. When I am saying deoxygenated blood means blood which has got a higher proportion of carbon dioxide in our body, 98 and 2 or 90 is to 10, ये भी possibly नहीं है कभी. So I would say it is something like 55, 45, उतना ही. 10% difference is more than what our body can tolerate. 10-15% उतना ही हमारा body tolerate कर सकता है, उससे ज़्यादा कभी नहीं होता. I would not even write 70-30, इतना difference भी नहीं होता. So then what is the meaning of deoxygenated blood? Try to understand now. The same thing we are going to study in the next segment of the chapter also. What is meant by deoxygenated blood? Deoxygenated blood means, write down, deoxygenated blood, differentiate deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. All of you have written the definition of alveolus?
Yes.
Wrote? Likho, definition of alveolus. First you will write down the definition of alveolus. Structural and functional unit of the lungs. First you write that and then you will written. Then you write. Then you will write down this. All of you will write down this small flow chart. Pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein. याद रहना चाहिए. What is the name the blood supply? Name the blood vessels which supply blood to the lungs and away from the lungs. To the blood, to the lungs, pulmonary artery. Away from the lungs, pulmonary vein. Just the image I showed you just now. Pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein. What type of blood does pulmonary artery carry? Now we are going to talk about. All of you will come write down this small flow chart that I have given you here. Next is, don't wait to get this one. Friends, but इसमें बहुत extra details है जो motion में नहीं चाहिए, but हाँ related to the diagrams are not very explanatory. Okay, now I told you complete that small flow chart, and after that, what do you understand by oxygenated and deoxygenated blood? What do you understand by oxygenated and deoxygenated blood? What do you understand by oxygenated and deoxygenated blood? Right? The blood that flows from the heart towards the lungs. Blood that flows from the heart towards the lungs. Blood that flows from the heart towards the lungs is, has a higher proportion of carbon dioxide than oxygen. Has a higher proportion of carbon dioxide than oxygen, known as deoxygenated blood. Known as deoxygenated blood. known as deoxygenated blood. Next paragraph. Blood that flows from the lungs towards the heart. Blood that flows from lungs towards the heart has a higher proportion of oxygen, than carbon dioxide, higher proportion of oxygen than carbon dioxide, known as higher proportion of oxygen than carbon dioxide, known as deoxygenated blood. Known as deoxygenated blood.
The highest proportion of carbon dioxide.
I didn't get you, Guru.
No, what is after highest proportion of
Higher proportion of carbon dioxide than oxygen, deoxygenated. Blood that has got higher proportion of carbon dioxide than oxygen is always deoxygenated. Blood that has higher proportion of oxygen than carbon dioxide is oxygenated. Okay? So what type of blood does the pulmonary artery carry? Deoxygenated. What type of blood? Pulmonary vein? Oxygenated blood. Now we move on to the next part of respiration, the concept of respiration. We are going to understand now the phases. Breathing, unless and until you are thorough about the concept of the respiratory system, understanding breathing not possible. So now we talk about breathing and the rest of the phases. So now you are aware about the blood supply, now you are aware about the entire system. Now you know the parts, structures, functions, everything. The alveolus. We'll just take one more question and then we move on to this one. Right, one more question. How are lungs designed? How are lungs designed in human? How are lungs designed in human to carry out the process of gaseous exchange? How are lungs designed in human? How are lungs designed in human to carry out the process of gaseous exchange? Right on. Lungs are a pair of pinkish colored spongy structures. Pinkish colored spongy structures present in the chest cavity, consisting of millions of air sacs known as the alveoli, consisting of millions of air sacs known as alveoli. Full stop. Next slide. Each alveolus has an extremely thin wall. Each alveolus has an extremely thin wall made up of a single layer of epithelial cells, and they are richly supplied with blood vessels. Full stop. These special features of the alveolus, allow the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide with the blood a process known as gaseous exchange. With the blood, a process known as gaseous exchange.
Can you repeat? Exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide.
With the blood, a process known as gaseous exchange. This is a question of your textbook, of your text itself. How are the lungs designed to carry out? So explain special features of the lung. How does the lungs look like? What is its location? What is it made up of? What are the special features of alveolus? All this should come in your answer. Now we are going to talk about the phases once we are thorough about all the other aspects. Now we talk about what is breathing, gaseous exchange process is what exactly, the tissue respiration and the cellular respiration. Now talking about the concept of breathing, we are going to understand what are the definitions for each of them. What is breathing? What do you think? What is breathing? Okay, the rest of this too new for you. This partly you had come across and this you should know. This is very simple. Breathing is what?
Tasting in oxygen and giving out.
Intake of oxygen.
यही लगा था तुम लोग बोलोगे हाँ.
Ma'am, it's the intake of oxygen and giving out oxygen, carbon dioxide.
और कोई बोलेगा? What is breathing? I'm really not convinced with the answer जो तुमने बोला. And you. Breathing. Mistake क्या है इस आंसर में? Can you tell me? Taking in of oxygen, giving out of carbon dioxide. Definitely lower standards में this is what we taught. This is what we have studied. But अभी वो definition भी नहीं चलेगी. Taking in of oxygen यहाँ नहीं. Correction क्या होनी चाहिए उस definition में अभी? Now see, when we are talking about our nostrils, does our nostrils have any filter for oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen compounds and sulfur compounds? कोई filter है? So how can we write that we take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide? So what should be the definition? We take in air. What is breathing? Yes, to understand that inhalation क्या है? We take in air. जिस एयर में ऑक्सीजन तो डेफिनेटली है, नाइट्रोजनस कंपाउंड्स भी है, सल्फर कंपाउंड्स भी है, कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड भी है. But now that the air reaches the lungs, from the lungs, then inside the body, only the oxygen is welcome. तो बाकी सारे gases का क्या हुआ? They are remaining in the lungs, they are remaining in the alveolus, and when we are exhaling, they are just coming out. But definition जब हम लिखेंगे, what is breathing? We cannot write the taking in of oxygen and giving out of carbon dioxide, taking in of air into the lungs and giving out of air from the lungs. That is the simplest definition of breathing. Then after breathing, all these things will happen one after the other. These are all simultaneous processes, one after the other. Let us write down the definitions and then we start understanding. When I give you the definitions, so एक part जैसे मैं explain करूँ, you try to tally also. Definition के साथ जा रहा है कि नहीं? Breathing, what is breathing? Just now I mentioned, write down the 4 definitions, write down first the 4 phases of respiration. एक के बाद एक हम define करते हैं पहले, and then we will know the process. The first is breathing. The process of taking in of air, process of taking in of, or specifically लिखना है तो atmospheric air you can write, but air also you can you write, that is also correct. The process of taking in of air into the lungs, and giving out of air and giving out of air from the lungs is known as breathing. Giving out of air from the lungs is known as breathing. Second, okay, just one more line to add there. All parts of the respiratory system are involved in this process. All parts of the respiratory system are involved in this process. All parts of the respiratory system are involved in this process. Go to the next definition. Exchange of gases. Gaseous exchange. Second phase. Gaseous exchange. The diffusion of oxygen from alveolus to the blood. Diffusion of oxygen from alveolus to the blood. And diffusion of carbon dioxide from the blood to the alveolus.
Can you repeat?
The diffusion of oxygen from the alveolus to the blood, and diffusion of carbon dioxide from blood to alveolus is known as gaseous exchange. Number 3, tissue respiration. Number 3, tissue respiration. Diffusion of oxygen from the blood to the tissues. Diffusion of oxygen from blood to the tissues. Diffusion of oxygen from blood to the tissues, and carbon dioxide from tissues to the blood. Tissues to the blood. I'll repeat again that thing. Diffusion of oxygen from blood to tissues, and diffusion of carbon dioxide from tissues to the blood is tissue respiration. Is tissue respiration. Number 4, cellular respiration. That's the last phase. Breakdown of glucose in the body cells. In the presence of oxygen. Breakdown of glucose in the body cells in the presence of oxygen. To carbon dioxide and energy. To carbon dioxide and energy is known as cellular oxidation. What you missed out?
Yes.
Carbon dioxide and energy
Yes.
is cellular oxidation or cellular respiration. Okay. यहाँ तक आया समझ में? Anything that is not understood? Any term, any concept जो समझ में नहीं आया है? Did you go through the previous part of the chapter also? धीरे धीरे I told you no. From time to time, keep reading. Textbook, NCERT textbook भी पढ़ना है. NCERT first of all, whenever you study, whenever you are studying the chapters, overall for science, for other subjects I don't know, you can ask your teachers. Overall for science, you will have to read the part of the chapter, textbook में. Then you refer to the volume. In the volume, everything is given in the form of points, examples, functions, features, sub specifically mentioned it. There are a whole lot of questions you try to solve. Okay. So this is how you should read, study. Then only you will see a difference in your results. How do you all study? पढ़ाई शुरू किया कि नहीं किया? क्या कैसे पढ़ते हो?
नोट्स देखो, फिर YouTube वीडियो देखो.
10th स्टैंडर्ड में अभी कौन सा फिजिक्स वाला?
फिजिक्स वाला नहीं मैम, मतलब एक स्पेसिफिक टॉपिक्स में डाइलेशन के लिए जब पढ़ रहा था, तो फर्स्ट में नोट्स देखा, तब जाके थोड़ा और समझने के लिए मैंने
कुछ डाउट्स आया कुछ?
नॉट नेसेसरली, बट मैंने फिर YouTube में देखा फॉर इवन क्लियर एक्सप्लेनेशन एनिमेशंस के साथ.
हाँ, so now see quite a number of times. अभी धीरे-धीरे अगले 4-5 लेक्चर के बाद you don't ask me a question, I'll send you home. जो लोग क्वेश्चन पूछेगा only they will sit in the class. नहीं तो बाहर भेजूंगी बुक के साथ. You have to read. By the time it is October, you should be very comfortable with your portions to finish हो चुका है. By the time it is September and you are tense, मतलब something is wrong. September, October आते आते the student is more or less confident. हाँ मुझे ये आता है, ये आता है, ये आता है और थोड़ा रिवीजन करना है. If these are the signs and symptoms, तो 95 पक्का. सितंबर आ गया, दशहरा दिवाली सब खत्म एंड घर का प्रेशर बढ़ रहा है, सबका ब्लड प्रेशर घर में ज्यादा है, कुछ तो गड़बड़ है. यू आर नॉट गोइंग द राइट वे. ओके, सो ये मेरा जो लाइंस है, हर एक बैच दे रिमेंबर दिस लाइंस. मैम आपका ये सेंटेंस हमने 50 बार सुना है, वो सुन के वो 95 लेके गया. सो दिस इज व्हाई आई टेल यू ऑल राइट फ्रॉम द बिगिनिंग. अभी you are relaxed, ज़्यादा पोर्शन खत्म नहीं हुआ है स्कूल में. Here we are finishing our portion so that you can read, study, revise. पढ़ोगे तो ही डाउट आएगा. The notebook now looks very neat, nice, बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है. इतने सारे questions, notes, इतना भरा हुआ, इतना अच्छा लग रहा है. But इसी तरह से आंसर स्क्रिप्ट भरा हुआ होना चाहिए. Then only it matters, है ना? So आंसर स्क्रिप्ट भरा होगा. 10th स्टैंडर्ड फोकस ऑन द कॉन्सेप्ट. ये जो मैंने अभी 4-5 क्वेश्चन आंसर जो भी फिलहाल इन दिस पीरियड मैंने जो लिखवाया है, जरूरी है कि एग्जाम में ये 5 में से कुछ भी ना आए. जरूरी है कि इसमें से कुछ भी ना आए एंड देन सम डिफरेंट सेट ऑफ क्वेश्चंस का. बट आंसर्स तुम्हारे ये 5 आंसर्स जो आया है पेपर में, वो आंसर्स इसमें ही छिपा है. बट यू आर नॉट एबल टू approach that question. So any question, how will you be able to approach when you know the topic? वो topic मुझे पूरा आता है. I know the structure, the function, the explanation, the reason out, everything मुझे पता है. Then कोई भी question मुझे दे दो, I know the answer. कैसे भी frame करके दे दो, I know the answer. ऐसा होना चाहिए for a 10th standard. You are no more in the 7th, 8th. Listen, I tell you. Right from the month of August, we'll have parents coming in. 7th standard में तो वो 92 लाता था, अभी तो 85 में आ गया है. This happens, you know why? Because still the 5th, 6th, 7th standard, 8th standard, 9th standard तक भी students generally have a habit of वही 50 question answers लिख लिया नोटबुक में, वही 50 को रट्टा मार के जाना है and लग भी जाता है, लग by chance हो भी जाता है, and then they get good marks. But ये 10th, 11th, 12th में नहीं होता. 10th, 11th, 12th में you have to know the topic. You have to know the concept. Science concept समझोगे then any question you'll be able to answer. ठीक है? So start studying also that way. You study a small part of the chapter for physics है, chemistry है, biology है. समझो concept क्या है, समझो words क्या है, meaning क्या है, definition क्या है, structure, function, etc. तो इस तरह से पढ़ोगे then it's easier also. एक बार अच्छी तरह से समझ गए, then it is easier, you can remain retained for a long time. कुछ प्रॉब्लम आ रही है so far in remembering, in understanding? Pakka? Go through, start your work, then you will have some questions also to ask. Yes, actually, not only for biology, for all subjects. जो 2 subjects के, I think for all subjects at least अभी 1-2 chapter तो खत्म हो गया होगा, at least 1 chapter is done, है ना? So read those chapters, then you will also feel confident. चलो ये मुझे आता है. Then those questions in the volume also I will give you to solve. Now what's happening? I give you the question and मैं ही ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा आंसर दे रही हूँ. इसका कोई मतलब नहीं. If you read, then the questions which I give you, 5 questions, 10 questions I give you, you know the answers and you are able to discuss. Most of them I will discuss because काफी सारे मैंने question answers already notebook में दिया है. So repeating and writing. जितना भी लिख लो, जितना भी मैं notebook भर के notes दे दूँ, unless and until you study, you are confident about the topic. Exam में results दिखाना difficult है. Okay. Now, the next topic I don't want to start now because just a few minutes left. At what time is the break? 45 minute break. Okay. So then let us start with a small concept, breathing, because these are all explanations and one after the other. It's a long concept, one after the other. Chalo, we'll talk about breathing then. At least we'll complete with breathing. What is this? Here we get to see there's a change in these 2 diagrams. What is the change? Can you understand? ये 2 diagrams में change क्या है? Number 1 is, in this diagram, if you see now, this is a concept of what? Inhalation, taking in of the air. So taking in of the air में what are the bodily changes? You have just now written down the definition for breathing. Breathing में is the food getting broken down? कोई chemical change हो रहा है in the body? Nothing. It is just a physical process where certain parts of the respiratory system majorly plays a role, and the air has to be filled in the lungs, and at the next phase the lungs have to be squeezed, air out of the lungs. So that is the process. Talking about breathing, the concept of breathing has 2 phases. What are the 2 phases of breathing? The 2 phases of breathing are, number 1, inhalation. The first phase is inhalation. And what about the second phase? The second phase is exhalation. So inhalation and exhalation are the 2 major phases of breathing. Let me talk about what are some of the bodily changes in the respiratory system which leads to this process. The first one, whenever we are talking about the concept of breathing, 2 major parts of the respiratory system or 2 major parts of the body, not exactly respiratory system, 2 parts of the body which majorly plays a role. Number 1, the rib cage, and number 2, this muscular sheath, diaphragm. These 2 majorly plays a role. So whenever I talk about inhalation, whenever we try to take in air, what some of the major changes happening in our body? We want to take in air, or whenever we are taking in air, we have not noticed that every time, but if now voluntarily you try to take in air, then you will notice, yes, these are the changes which are happening in the body. So what is the first change? Whenever we try to take in air, the rib cage starts moving a little bit forward. The rib cage moves a little bit forward and upward. That's the first change I'm mentioning. Whenever we are inhaling, the rib cage always moves a little bit forward and upward. Is this increasing the space inside the chest cavity? Yes, the rib cage was here. Now it has moved a little bit forward. So definitely the space of the chest cavity has increased. One more reason why the space of the chest cavity should increase is the diaphragm, which was a little bit curved, now has become very flat. The diaphragm, which was a little bit curved normally, now what happened? Burning. You want to close your eyes for 2 minutes? Now, when we are talking about the diaphragm, which is normally little bit curved, now that we try to inhale, the diaphragm becomes extremely flat. So ये diaphragm जो ऐसा था अभी absolutely flat हो गया. The ribs which was here has moved out. So are these two reasons good enough to increase the space of the chest cavity? Yes. So because of these, whatever amount of air is there in the lungs, the pressure of the air in the lungs has decreased. क्योंकि space ज़्यादा हो गया अभी. The pressure of the air in the lungs has decreased. So the chest cavity is a place of low pressure area now. Then which is the area of high pressure? The air surrounding the nostrils. The rule of diffusion says that air should always move from a region of high pressure to a region of low pressure. So जब ribs moving forward, diaphragm becoming flat, and the space inside the chest cavity increasing, and the region inside the chest cavity becoming a region of low pressure area, air is rushing inside the lungs. But for how long? For a couple of minutes, just for a minute. Now in a minute or two, now next what? The air is filled with lungs. Now that the air is filled with lungs, the ribs जो यहाँ पे था, it is again going back. Diaphragm जो ऐसा था, it is again coming up, extremely curved. So now that the ribs going back and diaphragm becoming extremely curved and lungs were filled with air, they are now squeezed. The lungs are now squeezed. They are now the lungs, the chest cavity is a region of high pressure. The space less, air more, that's a region of high pressure. The lungs are squeezed and the air rushing out from the lungs to the atmosphere. So what are some of the changes that we'll have to remember? One more thing, I mentioned about the rib cage, I mentioned about the diaphragm. But the rib cage is a set of bones. How can it move? Bones, does any bone in our body, does it move on its own? Does bones move on its own? Now that you are moving your fingers and palm and hands, are the bones moving on its own? Then what is aiding in the movement of the muscles? So same way, on the inner lining of the rib cage also there are some muscles known as the intercostal muscles. So those intercostal muscles which are on the inner lining of the ribs on both the sides, they are contracting, relaxing, allowing the ribs move forward, go back, move forward, go back, upward, downward. So these type of movements are brought about by the muscles present in the inner lining of the rib cage. So let us write now, what are the events in a sequence, what happens for inhalation? The first one are the ribs move forward and upward due to the contraction of intercostal muscles. I told you where are the intercostal muscles present? On the inner surface of the ribs. Okay. So ये है first. Second event क्या होगा? Diaphragm contracts and becomes flat. Diaphragm contracts and becomes flat. Third क्या होगा? Space of chest cavity increases. Fourth, atmospheric air fills into the lungs. The lungs are filled with air. You will also come across some terms in your paper. Lungs are inflated. Inflated matlab filled with air, tight filled with air. Lungs are inflated. Clear है all these 4 steps? If you have understood this, exhalation is just the reverse. Okay? If this you have understood, exhalation is just the reverse. So कहाँ पे changes है? You write down next paragraph में exhalation के points लिखो खुद. Just the opposite. Inhalation के just opposite है exhalation. Finish up first, then I'll tell you where the changes you have to make. Complete. Once we complete this, exhalation will start after the break.
अरे आज ही हो गया
Alex